So good evening, everyone. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are so delighted to have with us tonight Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson, who are going to be talking to you about a sense of control, lowering student stress, and improving academic success. These topics are much on the mind of parents, caregivers, and educators today, and they're bringing a lot of experience as well as being the co-authors of one of our very favorite parenting books, The Self-Driven Child.
It's great to be with you folks. And I'm a neuropsychologist. I make a living by 40 years testing kids if they're having problems and try to figure out what's wrong and what's right and how to help them. And I just got back from Chicago. I was and my daughter-in-law was in Milwaukee. And it made me remember, like 35 years ago, I tested this kid who had just moved to the DC area, Washington, DC, from Milwaukee. And I asked him the question on an IQ test, which is, at that time, which was, how are beer and wine alike? And he said, honest to God, he said, in my church, I think they're both used in communion. It's a fun way to make a living. And so we were asked whether we give a talk addressing this connection between academic pressure and mental health problems. And we're going to focus on the sense of control because from our angle, increasing kids' sense of control is the most powerful thing we can do to help them both academically and emotionally. And you see a slide of our three books, The Self-Driven Child that Charlie mentioned, our second book about communicating with kids, what do you say? And our third book coming out in March on the 7 principles for raising a self-driven child. And we're going to talk about 5 of them tonight. And then next slide, please, Ned. And so here's the stuff that just gets us up in the morning, that makes us just keep writing and keep wanting to talk with parents. Why don't you take 60 seconds and just read these 6 points. And for us, there's a couple major take-home points for this. And one is that we don't want kids to be too tired and too stressed for too long. That's the formula for becoming depressed. And it's not that when we talk about anxiety and depression scarring the brain, it's not that if teenagers develop an anxiety disorder or get depressed, that they're doomed. But what it does is it changes the brain in a way that just makes it more likely that they're going to have a recurring anxiety or bouts of depression. And that because their brain is still plastic, a lot can be healed. If not all of it can be healed, but it doesn't heal if they're too tired and too stressed all the time. And unfortunately, most teenagers report being tired and stressed most of the time. So that's the major point. And the point about young adults, and just recently that it became clear, this survey out of Harvard found that 36% of young adults report the symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder, and 31% of major depression. And we think that a significant part of that is the effects of chronic stress and sleep deprivation on the developing brain in the teenage years. And so some of the kids we think that we see, and some of the parents we work with, have the idea that whatever they have to do to get into a good college will be worth it. In our experience, it's not, because we want kids to be able to enjoy their success. We see so many adults who are really, really successful who are miserable. And we want them to have a brain that just knows how to work hard and be successful, but also is capable of enjoying success. Ned, do you want to make the other main point?
Yeah, and the flip side of that coin is what young people experience in school, where that's kind of most of their waking hours are spent there. Want to make a quick note: a lot of people are probably quite familiar with the work of Jonathan Haidt in the book The Anxious Generation, and we really respect the work that he has put into that. Uh, we have a slight concern in that the takeaway in a lot of corners of the world seem to be, if only we could get rid of cell phones, then everything will be fine. And we just don't think that that's right, in part because we started doing the research for the self-driven child in 2016. And at that point, the incidence of anxiety and depression, stress-related disorders, and disorder motivation for young people was already off the charts. Then in the early 2000s, teens were reporting 5 to 8 times more likely to report symptoms of anxiety and depression than people were during the Great Depression or the Second World War or Vietnam. And so these were really, really troubling concerns before, even before the smartphone. And the smartphone, of course, has exacerbated things, but we think we would be remiss if we simply held to the idea without cell phones, all will be right in the worlds of teens. And a big part of this, of course, is that academic kids tend to be a lot of academic pressure. And we feel pretty strongly that kids can be really successful in everything that matters to them, including in school, but doing it in a way that's healthier and more sustainable. The way that most schools are currently constituted, they're pretty brain unfriendly. Bill and I actually gave a presentation to an International Festival of Education a week or so back about brainless education, with the idea that what happens in most schools, you'd think that educators there either don't know anything about what we've learned about developing brains in the last 40 years, or they just really don't care. And so we want your kids to be as successful as they can be, but we will hope to convince you by the end of this evening that it's safe to support kids in ways that we're not going to sacrifice their success in school or their success in life in order that we don't have to make a choice between healthy brains and academic and life success.
So our thesis is that the two most important things we can do for our children are, number one, is to help them feel that they're deeply loved unconditionally, no matter what they do, no matter how successful they are, no matter how hard they work. And secondly, that we help them develop a sense of control of their own lives. And part of the connection between sense of control and mental health is really powerful, in part because all mental health problems involve, they're stress related. They all involve a kind of a dysregulated, overly sensitive, overly reactive stress response, a fight or flight response. And we know that stress impairs attention and the ability to the executive functioning, the planning, organization, inhibition, and the learning and memory. And so for students to be highly stressed, it really impairs their learning, which affects their mental health. And we got to a sense of control in part when we learned that you can summarize what makes life stressful with the acronym NUTS, and it's novelty, unpredictability, perceived threat, it can be physical threat or to your ego, basically, and a low sense of control. And all the stress scientists say that low sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. And so we figured if all mental health problems are stress related, and the most stressful thing you can experience is a low sense of control, this must be a really big idea. Ned, do you want to make it?
Yeah, and part of the reason we to add to Bill's point, that we know that when school becomes challenges, right? When they have kids have struggles in school, it's going to affect their mental health. We also know that when kids have struggles with their mental health, it's going to affect their school. And so this is a feedback loop, right? And so from our perspective, anything we can do that improves the experience of kids in school is going to improve their learning. There's a big study that came out of Yale a few years ago that found that students in school, that 70% of kids were bored and stressed and tired most of the time. And perhaps because of that, 75% of their feelings around school were negative. And this, again, is a pretty brain unfriendly way for kids to experience school. And because school is such an important part of young people developing themselves, but more importantly, it's a significant part of them developing the brains that they have, we really want to do everything we can to not have kids not take school seriously or to have adequate challenge, but to do everything we can to support their healthy sense of control while they're engaged in the process of learning. And I would say so that they can engage in the process of learning. And we think of this sense of control in two dimensions. One, it's the subjective sense of autonomy and agency, that I can handle hard things, right? That I have choices over my life. We're going to dig into these things later. And in this, of course, is parent supported and educator supported, but we really want to have kids have increasing a much higher sense of control than most kids feel most of the time. And the second domain of this idea of a sense of control is simply that when we're in our right mind, the prefrontal cortex with all those executive functions of organization, planning, problem solving, decision making, cognitive flexibility, emotional flexibility, things that we really need to be successful on, oh, I don't know, the SAT or learning or emotional regulation, that part of the brain runs the show, including handling, teaching the stress-related part of the brain, that we can handle this, that we can cope. And at the core of this is both the experiences and everything in kids' lives that support healthy brains. And this, I mean, from our perspective, apart from loving kids from the top of their heads to the bottom of their toes, the second most important thing that we can do for young people is to foster for them and in them a healthy sense of control, because it's just good for everything from academic success, career success, to happiness, mental health, and friggin' longevity. So we want to talk with you about some of the things that we think can help in that way. So these are principles from the book that's coming out, The 7 Principles of the Self-Driven Child, which is really designed as a workbook. So we're pretty excited to share these things with you. And I'll let you take just a moment and read this, and I'll jump into these, and Bill and I will kind of tag team back and forth on this. I'm sure you're all out there in Silicon Valley are all fast readers, so. Okay, so we'll go through these one by one. So I'm going to talk first about connection and why connection is such a big deal. If we think about this through a sense of control model, one of the things is we want home to feel like a safe base. Because if kids are really going to put themselves out there and exert themselves in the classroom, on the playing field, right, in music and everything that matters to them, it helps a lot if home feels like it's safe and they can go home and even occasionally be the worst self and not have to be thinking about, how is mom or dad going to respond to me, and have to keep their guards up, because having to keep your guard up is emotionally really, really taxing. And when we wrote our second book, What Do You Say? We start the first chapter with empathy and validation and the power of connection. For the most important reason is that a close connection that a child has with a parent or another caregiver is the single strongest protective factor against the effects of stress on developing brains. Full stop. Full stop. And so if we want kids to develop brains in ways that are healthy, we want home to feel like it's safe for them. The second thing that's really important about this is that as parents, we really can't, pardon me 1 second, we can't help young people solve problems that we don't know about. And of course, as loving parents or caregivers, when your kid is struggling, you want to be able to help. But if kids feel like they're being judged or they're being told what to do all the time, they have a tendency to not want to share things with us. We also know that when kids share hard feelings with their parents or caregivers, it not only lowers their stress, it fosters emotional connection, right? And the last thing on this is really, how do we go about fostering the sense of connection? And there's a tendency to, when kids bring a problem to us, our first reaction is almost always, how can we help? Right? We start peppering them with suggestions. If they're really upset about them, we try to remind them it's just the first test of the semester, and they'll have plenty of time to catch up on this. And these are really well-intended instincts. It's called the righting reflex, and we all have this for people that we care about. The challenge with the writing reflex is this. When we start offering suggestions or telling kids maybe how they should think differently about things, it feels pretty invalidating. So I'd like to offer a tool or two to you about how to do this differently. And what we want to do is use what's called reflective listening. And it's basically just repeating back to someone what you think you've heard, expressing empathy for what they're going through, and validating. So, if Bill comes to me and he's spun up about whatever, I say, well, gosh, boy, you look like it's been quite a day, huh, Bill? I mean, that was way more than you handled. And gosh, those people really weren't nice to you, huh? I'd be upset too if I felt like people were bruising me and beating me up for things I hadn't done wrong. No, Bill could have been completely at fault and bollocksed up everything, but I don't have to agree with his facts, right, to validate that feeling. If a kid comes home and is spun up because they bombed a test and it's so unfair that Mr. Johnson put all these things on the test, and you're thinking, really, kiddo? I watched you watch football for 7 hours straight. You don't have to agree with the facts to say, well, golly, I'd be pretty upset too if I really cared about that test and I felt like I'd studied really hard and then it didn't go well. And when we use this tool, it's feeling understood that calms heart's feelings. It's not logic that calms heart feelings. And we're going to come back to this over and over, but I'll hand it off to Bill with a quick reminder that it's only when we validate what kids are feeling that they let their guards down and share with us things that are hard, both in relationships and in school. And it's only when we have a clear understanding about what's really going on that we're then well positioned to be able to help and offer suggestions, the kind of things that can help them solve the problems that they have.
Now, tell that story about the seventh grade kid one of the lectures that Charlene set up for us out in the Bay Area.
Oh, yeah. So this was, yeah, and I'll tell two quick stories. The first one is really quickly. I have this kid who's in Miami, she's complicated, she's anxious, she's depressed, loving, loving, loving parent who's super trying to help. And I'm trying to coach mom on how to be, I'll finish that story in a minute. When we were out last night out visiting Charlene and lovely folks out in your corner of the world, Charlene passed an email on to us from a mom who'd come home after a lecture and listened to us talk about stuff. And her seventh grader was just kind of fit to be tied. And he's like, Mom, I'm the weakest boy in all of seventh grade. And she said, normally I would have said, oh, sweetheart, that can't possibly be true. Or everyone in our family is a late bloomer. You'll catch up. Don't worry about that. Or you're so good at math and engineering. Being strong isn't everything, to try to talk him out of those hard feelings. But because it's a little invalidating, because she just heard us talk, she said, I bit my lip and I didn't do that. And I said, boy, you're really upset, huh? He said, uh-huh. And she said, I'd be pretty upset too if I felt like everyone else was getting big and strong and I'm not there yet. That's really hard, huh? And he said, yeah. And they went back and forth like this a little while, and he dried his eyes and he gave her a hug and he went to bed, and she hadn't offered any advice at all. And the kid comes down to breakfast the next morning with a plan, a written plan for how he thinks he can gain strength. And he enlists his mom's help. Can you help me do pull-ups? Because, can you push me? All these kind of things. And this is the ideal outcome that we want, because we want children to have the experience of solving their own problems, because the solving of problems is what wires the prefrontal cortex to dampen down the stress response, that you don't panic when things are hard because you've had the experience of handling things and solving problems that are hard. And so thank you for the reminder, Bill. And it's just a simple, elegant thing. And all she did was just take it, emotionally understand his perspective and say, I see you, I get it. That is hard. And she didn't try to talk him out of it. Do you want to talk about what we can do if we do get buy-in after connection?
Yeah. So the second point that you read on the previous slide was that we want to, especially as our kids start to get older, and certainly by the time they're in high school, we want to think about our role as kids as more of as a consultant to them, rather than their boss or the manager or the homework police. And the idea is that we want kids to be able to run their own lives before they leave home, because otherwise they're likely to run them into the ground when they leave home. And I was given a talk in Houston a few years ago, and about our first book. And I happened to mention what's arguably the most elite high school in the Washington, D.C. area. And this woman came up to me after the lecture and said, we know this school, and she said, I'm a psychotherapist here at the Manager Center in Manager Clinic in Houston, this very good mental health clinic. And she says, we know this school in DC really well because so many of the graduates, they get into the top universities in the country. But as soon as they get a B, as soon as they realize that everybody here is as smart as I am, as soon as they want to go out, they text a girl and she ghosts them. They can't handle emotionally. So they take a leave of absence and they come here for treatment. And she said 201, they don't have enough experience running their own life when they go off to college. And I also, just years ago, in 2016, I think, there's an article in the Atlantic about a spate of suicides that happened to occur in the Bay Area And one of the experts who was asked, what's going on with these kids, said, they feel existentially impotent. Another one said, I've been a therapist with these kids for 25 years, and 25 years ago, they used to fight back. 15 years ago, they're still fighting back. I'm not going to live with this pressure. This isn't me. I can't stand it. Now they're just resigned to it. That low sense of control. And so what we want to do is we want to act as a consultant whose mission it is to help kids figure out who they want to be, what kind of life they want to create, and how to create it. And basically, how to run their own life before they leave home. 3 implications. One is that we want to help, we want to offer help, and we want to offer our advice, but not try to force it on kids' throat. And as an illustration, we talk in our second book about the language of a parent consultant. And part of it is the language of getting buy-in. So rather than telling kids what to do or say, why don't you do, you need to do this or this, you say, I've got an idea about it at that, kind of run it by you. Or what I do a lot in my own work is I say, for whatever it's worth, and I'll run my opinion by it, but I want to make it tentative so it doesn't feel like I'm forcing it. That just simply saying, is there a way that I could help? I remember giving a lecture in upper state New York, and this woman, I was talking about this point, and this woman who's in the front row stands up and turns to the rest of the audience and said, this idea changed my relationship with my daughter. She's in boarding school, she's in 10th grade. And every week we talk several times on the phone, and every single time she brings up some problem, and I say, well, you need to do this or this, and then she fights me on it, and it devolves into an argument. She said, I read this book, and then she calls, we talk, she tells me this problem. I simply said, is there a way that I could help? And then it was fun. Then we brainstormed about it, and we felt so much closer. So it's a language of getting buy-in. I wonder what would happen if you tried it this way. It's tentative. It's not trying to force. And the language of not trying to force kids is things like, I tell kids all the time, obviously, I couldn't make you do that. Or nobody could really make you do that. All you have to do is flop to the floor or close your eyes. And when you give up trying to think that I'm supposed to be able to force my kid, it's very empowering. And I feel like I have a superpower a lot of times because I can get kids to do try almost anything I think is good for them. If I just say, it's going to be your call. I don't want anybody to make you do this. I think you ought to try it and see, could this be helpful to you? This one kid had resisted. He didn't want to do his Jewish kid, fairly observant family, had been resisting his bar mitzvah. He said, I'm not going to do it. I don't believe in God. I don't want to do it. And the mother came to consult with me, and I explained to her, just say to him, obviously, we couldn't make you do it. We couldn't make you learn your Torah portion. We couldn't move your lips up when you at the synagogue, and so you don't have to do it. And then they say, at the same time, it's really important to us that you do. It's important to your family, and we hope you find a way to do it. And after fighting it for a year, he said, okay, I'll do it. And you negotiated. So you didn't want to do it in front of the whole synagogue, but they worked it out. But the taking force off the table is extremely powerful. So the first thing, offer help and advice, but don't try to force. The second thing is that we want to, wherever possible, encourage kids to make their own decisions, because we want our high school kids to learn to trust their own judgment, trust their own tuition, not ours. Because when we send them off, we don't want them to be calling home every day from college, and we want them to be able to trust themselves. And the way kids become good decision makers is they practice making decisions. Ideally, after consulting with people who have more experience in whatever area we're talking about than they do, but who they practice making decisions. And I was talking with a woman recently who said, I encouraged her to basically be this consultant to her kid. Her kid's a rock and roll musician. He's 35 years old, not exactly what she would have chosen. She said, he's the happiest person I know. And he's so productive. His fiance says he's the most confident person I know because he's had so much confidence in his own decisions. So where we want kids to we want them to make their own decisions. And our motto is, go with the kids' decisions unless they're crazy. I mean, meaning nobody would think that's a good idea. because we don't want to give them the message, unless we absolutely have to, that I know better than you do what's right for you. We want them to be able to trust themselves. And thirdly, is simply is kind of what Ned was talking about. Because we have this writing influence, we're mammals. We want to protect and soothe our young. We often try to solve their problems for them. And what builds resilience and emotional strength in kids is solving their own problems. Because when a kid has a problem and starts to cope with it, what happens is the prefrontal cortex, the executive part of the brain, activates. And whenever the prefrontal cortex activates, it dampens down your stress response. So when you're coping with something, a stressful situation, when you're coping with it, it's not that stressful. It's when you don't know what to do. It's when you feel helpless. You feel overwhelmed. That's the most stressful thing. But when you're coping, it's not that stressful. And we want kids to solve problems because what it does, it changes the brain. It changes the brain in a way that something stressful happens. Rather than trying to avoid it or freaking out, you go into coping mode. You activate that prefrontal cortex and go into coping mode. So those are the 3 points about parent as consultant. It's a powerful idea, and it really can change your relationship with your kid. It can really change the trajectory of your kid's life.
Bill, one thing that occurs to me, there was that article that came out from Surgeon General Vivek Murthy about how really overwhelmed so many parents feel. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. But certainly one of the things that occurs to me is that for any of us as parents who are trying to take on responsibilities that really should be in the hands of children and teens especially, we're taking on more than our fair share of responsibilities. And then kids often fight the things we're trying to get them to do. And that, by definition, is going to be pretty darn stressful. I mean, I feel pretty confident that if you're trying to do something that's impossible to do, you're going to be pretty stressed about it. And, trying to get a kid to do things where they fight you all the time. And it's obviously injurious to your relationship with your kid as well. And so this idea of being a consultant, it just changes the energy in ways that it is so helpful. The kind of related to that is we talk about in both books about the idea of being a non-anxious presence. And that may make a lot of people sort of like chuckle, like, yeah, and I'll sprout wings and I'll fly to the moon, Ned. But we're going to talk about this, why it's beneficial and what people might do to move in this direction. The first thing, of course, if you go back to that connection piece, that it's really hard if we as parents are really spun up, it's really hard to be a safe base. It's really hard for kids to feel like it's safe to share things with us. When we're stressed out, a lot of times kids don't want to tell us their problems because they're worried that they're going to somehow be more of a burden to them. I'm protecting my mom and my dad from those things because they already have enough on their plate. And so to the degree that we can convey being a non-anxious presence makes it a lot more likely the kids are open with us. The second thing when we're less anxious is we're much less likely to be controlling because a low sense of control is so stressful. When people are stressed, they tend to try to exert more control. And then, of course, we've got kind of a power dynamic going with the kids, and nobody wins that way. I started to tell a story a moment ago about a kid who's in Miami, and she's a lovely, lovely kid, and I love her parents. And she's ADHD and all, just anxious, all kinds of stuff going on. And I was talking with her and then with her mom about kind of coaching. How can she help? And so I was asking the girl, can you think what your mom could do to sort of be this consultant, right? Because your mom's super bright and organized in ways that are hard for you. What would be helpful for her to do? What role? And she came back, she thought about this for a week, and she came back later and she said, really, she said, I think I mostly got school. I mean, it's not perfect, but I think I've got it down pretty well. I think I really want my mom to help me with life. I said, well, tell me more what that looks like. Well, she said, my mom loves me and she always wants to help, but she gets so involved in the schoolwork and it's not that helpful. And I think she just really wants to spend time with me. So what I really think we need to do is just spend time with each other. And I'm saying, I'm loving this, like what? And she's like, sort of a date night. If we went to pizza every night, and I'm thinking, kid, you have no idea how on you are about this because when this girl who is anxious gets to spend time with a mom who she doesn't feel like is going to jump on her, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do that? they can both relax and they can enjoy each other's company more. And to Bill's point, that prefrontal cortex that she's trying to develop, that prefrontal cortex also comes online because when you're anxious, it's nowhere to be seen. And so the idea that the medicine for this kid to do better in school is just the medicine for them to enjoy their company more is a really big deal. So that's kind of the first piece of advice we'd offer to any parent is just to spend more time with your kid, ideally one-on-one, face-to-face, ideally no technology, ideally their agenda, in ways when you're just trying to enjoy their company. And the hard part for us as parents is we feel like particularly if our kids are struggling, that if we're not putting all of our energy into fixing the thing, that somehow we're bad parents. We've got to fix this thing, and then we can really enjoy one another, and then we can all relax. And I'll speak from my own experience, and maybe I'll talk deeply about this, but I'll simply say for my kids who've had a lot of challenges going through health issues and emotional stuff, I put all of my energy into, oh, I'm going to cry even talking about it, all of my energy into my relationship with them because I know I have two kids that are pretty darn smart, and I'm sure the same as almost everyone on this call as well. And I also know that they want their lives to work out. But the thing that there are all kinds of sources for information, but there's only one person who gets to be dad, and there's only one person in our family who gets to be mom. And was going to be darned if I was going to squander that relationship to focus on the content. Part of the reason for this as well is that stress is wildly contagious. So if your kid's stressed out, he's going to stress you out. But if you're stressed out, you're going to stress her out. Back and forth it goes. And so it's a question of who's going to break that cycle. So when my kid, who was full school refusal for 8th grade and now is just killing it in college, I can't even tell you. Full school refusal last 3 months of 8th grade. I help people get into college. What's going through my head? And I'm like, I had to keep telling myself, I had to work on myself and work on myself and work on myself so that I wasn't putting more energy into her nervous system that was already running too hot. But I really worked on being a stress sponge because this is great. Not only is stress wildly contagious, but all emotions are contagious. When we were writing the chapter about the language of a non-anxious presence in our second book, What Do You Say? Bill stumbled across the fact that calm is contagious is a mantra of, wait for it, the Navy SEALs. I think of these as, I don't know about you, high performance individuals under a lot of stress. And they know that when the person in charge is not overly emotional, then it helps everyone else be a little bit less stressed. And when we're a little bit less stressed, we think better. And because we're talking about academic success, we would like kids to think better. So move if you can in the direction of being non-anxious. Now, I know there are people who have a lot more headwinds going on than they wish. And there are people who themselves are clinically anxious or they're clinically depressed. And so do everything you can to get your own, to work on your own stuff you can and get the help that you need. Because even if you don't do anything for your kid, if you are simply less anxious, it makes it easier for your kid to think better and to heal everything when there's less stress in the system. And I'll share this last one. So for people who have heard Bill and me talk before, you may know my daughter had a whole bunch of stuff, and then my son threw another ball up into the air for us to try to juggle by developing or acquiring, whatever the word is, a brain tumor after his first year of college. Smack dab in the middle of COVID, mind you. Oh my golly, this was a lot. He's great now. I can send you music about it. He's doing wonderfully. He's such a wonderful kid. But man, oh man. And so my wife and I were out, got him back to the hospital here. We're out for dinner probably 3 weeks into this. And my wife turned to me and she said, I've had like 3 people ask me, how are you so calm about all this? And she looked at me and she said, honestly, I think it's the meditation. So I've been practicing transcendental meditation for, I don't know, 10, 15 years, Bill, for about 400. I'm teasing you, Bill. My wife picked it up about 4 years ago, and she's from a lovely family. They're super accomplished, super bright, blah, 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 but they're not calm. They're pretty tightly wound. And she said, honestly, I don't know that I could handle this the way that I have without this tool to pull stress out of my nervous system. Now, this isn't to say everyone should go do TM, but if you do, it's probably a pretty good idea. But when you have tools and processes that pull stress out of your system, even just by being around your kid non-anxiously, they don't have to do a darn thing. You pull stress out of their nervous system. It makes it easier for them for everything that matters, from school and emotion regulation and on it goes. So We take this concept pretty seriously. And Bill and I both have daily practices of sleep and exercise and meditation because we know that when we think better and are less anxious, we help other people be less anxious and think better.
Yeah. I know this family that the mother and her 17-year-old son with autism learned transcendental meditation together. And after meditating for several months, they really liked it. And a newspaper reporter interviewed the autistic son and said, "What do you notice from meditation?" He said, "It calms the mind and it calms the mom." It makes more of a non-anxious presence.
And I got
And
one more point to the Bill. I mean,
yeah,
something you remind people because Bill works with families where things are hard. I mean, learning is hard, emotional regulation is hard, and attention is hard. And one thing he constantly reminds folks, and I've picked this up from him, is to take the long view. Because when your kid is struggling, my kid had no friends for a year and a half in middle school, or your kid is like just dying with grades. And what happens, we get so anxious, right? And we start thinking, oh my gosh, if this kid doesn't get better grades, they're going to end up homelessness. We even sometimes tell our kids things like that. And if you can know that the way that your kid is struggling, if you've got a kid who's anxious, you've got a kid who's depressed, you've got a kid who has no friends, you've got a kid who hasn't figured out school, if you could remind yourself that this may just be part of their path and that they're going to turn out fine long term, then you wouldn't worry. It'd be so much easier to be a non-anxious presence. And I did this with my daughter when, again, school refusal, everything was a hot mess. We went out for this walk and she was just, and she said, oh, and I looked at her and I said, listen, you are creative as all get out and you're kind, you're smart as a tack, you're absolutely vicious at board games. I haven't won in 3 years. I said, you're going to have really good friends in this world and you're going to contribute to the world in ways that are really meaningful. And she said, I can't tell the story without crying. I'm sorry. And she said, it sure doesn't feel that way. I said, I know it does because everything is hard for you right now. And it's hard for me to watch it too. But I'm confident, and I don't like to play an older than you card, but I've been around the sun a few more times than you have. And I'm convinced that the biggest thing that I did to help this kid of mine, who's doing great, by the way, is that she was easier for her not to go down a spiral of fear because her mom and I didn't do that either.
yeah.
Sorry for the tears, pal. I can't think about my kid without it.
I love you, buddy.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. So just reviewing, the first three principles are put connection first, play the role of consultant, not the boss or manager, move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence for your kid. And Ned, let's take about just 3 minutes on the
Yeah.
principles. And then the next one is to motivate your kid without trying to change them. And parents are always asking Ned and me, how do I motivate my kid? And we were working on our second book that we realized what they're really saying is, how do I change my kid? And so we looked at the science of change to figure out kind of what do we know about from the science of change about motivation? And we knew from the most elegant theory of motivation, which is self-determination theory, that what young people need to be really intrinsically, internally motivated is they have to have a sense of being a relatedness with their parents or their teachers or their coaches. They need a sense of competence. And more than anything else, they need that sense of autonomy or sense of control that we were talking about earlier, talking about this whole time. And so that's important. And also, we talk in our second book about something, a program out of Yale called the SPACE program. And it stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions, developed by Ellie Leibovitz at Yale. And it's a very powerful program for treating anxiety in children that only works with parents. And the idea is that parents, because we're mammals, we're wired to protect and soothe our young. When our kids are anxious, we try to prevent them from things that make them anxious. And it turns out that doing that makes them more anxious, making accommodations. So what parents are taught to do is say, I know that standing at the bus stop makes you really anxious, or I know that this or that makes you really anxious, but I'm 100% confident you can handle it. The focus is on not on trying to make it easy for kids to avoid anxiety, but say, I'm supporting you, I'm here with you, and I know you can handle it. And the second point is learning to where we are making accommodations. We're making sure we don't have people over for dinner because it makes the kids have social anxiety or something. That when we say we stop doing that. We do it in kind of a skilled way that you practice doing, but we do it so that ideally, with kids that have anxiety, we support them in learning ways to manage anxiety, but we don't make it worse by making these accommodations or by thinking that somehow they can't handle it. Because the way you become competent, the way you become emotionally resilient, is through as I said earlier, is through handling emotions, handling stressful situations. So we think that there's so much that parents can do to help kids emotionally and motivationally without trying to change them. Because if you try to change somebody who's not asking you to help them change, what you get is conflict and resistance.
And that's the other major point of this chapter is what's called motivational interviewing. And to follow up on Bill's point, when parents are often thinking, how do I motivate my kid? They're really saying, how do I change him? And so often they're asking Bill or me or anyone else who really like kind of like, what are the words that I use to get a kid to do this thing? Like if only I had the magic lesson or magic words, then this would make him change. Motivational interview was created by folks who worked with problem drinkers, and what they knew was that we don't need to find the perfect words. In that, when kids are, or any of us is in a hard situation, there's usually ambivalence. I already have the reasons to do this thing, but I also have reasons to not do this thing. So for a kid who's really struggling in school, or even just kind of meh in school, right? It's not lost on a kid that if he worked a little harder and got better grades, that might give him more opportunities, or his parents would be more proud, or his teachers would lay off a little bit more. But he also can know that, maybe he doesn't like Mr. Johnson as a teacher, or maybe he'd rather be spending time with his friends, or maybe he's got an older sister and he feels like he can never compete, or maybe he could work super, super hard and go from grades that are meh to like meh plus. And then he'd know the actual limits of his cognitive abilities. And that's just too scary to take on. And so what happens in this, when we argue one side, all the reasons why you got to do this thing, man, people will reflexively argue the other side of it. And so what we're trying to do is not motivate kids or tell them the reason to do the thing, but to create energy for them to to find for themselves, and ideally to articulate for themselves the reason to do the thing. And this goes right back to where I started with the connection, that the simple process, we use open-ended questions, we use reflective listening, and then we wait for change talk. So really quickly, the story in our book was a friend who's a skilled counselor who caught wind of a kid who was smoking a lot of pot, and she goes right up to her, takes force off the table the way the bill said, "Hey, I'd love to talk with you about the weed that you're smoking. I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. You're a smart kid, not going to do, but I'm interested to know what your experience with weed is, right?" And so she asked her, "What do you get out of it?" And the girl talks about her friends are cooler and she feels cooler and more relaxed and blah blah blah. She uses reflective listening, repeats the whole thing back to her, doesn't try to talk her out of it. And they go back and forth this way. And the girl eventually mutters something like, "It is kind of expensive, though." Our friend doesn't jump on that. "Oh, tell me more about that." Back and forth, open questions, reflective listening. The girl then goes on to talk about how, well, if I had more money, I would, blah, 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 I'd buy these shoes, I'd get my hair cut. Our friend, the counselor, thanks her for sharing this with you because I really wanted to understand how you see it. Sees the girl a couple weeks later, she's got her hair cut. Walks up, "Hey, tell me about this." "Oh, I decided I'd only buy once last week, and I used the money to get my hair cut. Do you like it? Looks so good on you." When kids are stuck and we pull harder, they pull harder the other direction. Now, it's easier, obviously, to talk to someone else's kid about smoking weed than it is with your own because your emotions are going to be high. But when you have a kid who's stuck, this is really powerful medicine to help them articulate for themselves, to make changes in their lives that would help them. Everybody knows the things to do, but we really want to help kids articulate to themselves because when we push it on them, they bat it away, or the advice that we offer now feels tainted to them, and they'll do anything not to take the advice that we've given to them, if only because they feel like we forced it on them, and feeling forced is such a low sense of control.
So Ned, let's take 2 minutes to
Yep.
talk about the last point, and then we'll take
Yep.
questions. So
Yeah.
the last point is to help kids develop or acquire an accurate model of reality. Yeah, I was lecturing in Houston a few years ago, and I asked this group of student leaders, they're a very high achieving high school, how many want to be happy as adults? They all raise their hand. And I said, what do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult? And one kid said, well, I think I'm speaking for everybody, that if we get into a good enough college, everything's set. And I'm figuratively banging my head against the wall. Has no one told them about all the crisis in mental health in elite colleges? Has no one told them about Laurie Santos at Yale, who was so struck by how unhappy the Yale undergraduates were. They got themselves to Yale and they were miserable. So she started teaching the first course in the history on the science of happiness, and it quickly became the most popular course in the history of Yale University. So part of getting an accurate model of reality is helping kids understand that elite college, there's some advantage going to elite college, but most successful people don't. It's not necessary. It's not required. And there's all kinds of ways to become successful in this world. And the second point is that when people think that's going to make me happy, they don't, well, it means they don't understand happiness. And that's do a final minute on happiness.
Yeah, so this is what's called positive psychology, and so rather than looking at what's going wrong with people and how to help them suffer less, this is Martin Seligman who studied looking at people who are really thriving. And you can read this as well as I can, you know. So positive emotions, I mean, some part of that's your wiring, but it's also sleep and meditation and gratitude practices. Engagement, what we talk about in our books about passionate pursuit of pastimes. We borrow this from a great researcher, that the teens tend to become intrinsically motivated by engaging in things they like, but it's also a huge source of enjoyment. And so we worry a lot about kids only doing things for the purpose of getting into college. Is that what colleges want? As opposed to, they just like it because they're developing their brains and they're making themselves happy. Positive emotions, we've talked quite a bit about this, and this is friends and coaches and teachers, but most of all parents. And then meaning, you know, there's so, you know, do I get service hours for going to do that? Well, colleges like that, as opposed to, if it's important to me, it's meaningful to me to work on a campaign or to work on environmental stewardship or to address social justice or religiosity, whatever it is. And so it's not that accomplishment isn't a source of happiness. It's just that it's only 1/5 of the equation. And importantly, it turns out many of us misunderstand what happiness means. A lot of people think things that bring pleasure will bring happiness, and they're actually rooted in different neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitter dopamine, which the one that leads to addiction, is what we experience with pleasure. And the problem is too much of it, then we adapt to it, and it doesn't give us a thrill anymore. Where happiness is actually rooted in serotonin, which is a subjective sense of just feeling like things are right in the world. And we get that more from these left side, these four things on the left side, rather than for accomplishment. And so I know that you guys, everyone who's listening, that these are accomplished families and accomplished schools with talented academic children who are going to do really wonderful things in this world. It's just that we feel strongly, and we kind of think the science is on our side, that we don't have to sacrifice mental health and happiness in order to have a career, to have academic and career achievement. And if we just talk more openly with kids about this, we can help things go a lot better. I'll say really quickly, we have top 10 tips from both of our books. I'll put this in here at the bottom. You'll see our website. If you go there, through on your website, you get a printout, things you can put them on a refrigerator magnet. For people who are too busy to read books, you can use those. But we do think there's a lot of good stuff in the books too, so we encourage you to check those out.
And now, Charlene, why don't you join us? We'll take questions.
That sounds awesome, gentlemen. Okay, here we are. Well, thank you for that brilliant discussion. People in the chat are very grateful because you've given them so many good tips. And parents, you know, we've known Bill and Ned for quite a while now, and my kids are young adults. I'm a grandparent now, and I use the things that they say every day. It really works. But I wanted to start. We have some wonderful questions coming in, but just first, I want to ask quickly, why is it so hard for parents to cede control, do you think?
Because a low sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. And when you cede control to your kid, you have to sit in your hands and zip your lip. What's more stressful than that? Well, you know, your kid could drive could drive the car off the cliff. You know, you don't know. It's because it's so stressful. Part of that, that's part of the reason. It's so stressful even if we're really convinced it's right. It's emotionally hard. For many people, they feel like I'm being an irresponsible parent. I'm just supposed to let him do what he wants, kind of idea. And we aren't saying the kids do whatever they want. We work on limits with kids, but the most important outcome we think of childhood and adolescence is a healthy brain, and healthy brain requires a healthy sense of control.
Well said.
So we don't end up with 8-year-olds driving to Target like that little girl did.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that
That's suboptimal.
So here's a great question. This is kind of if you give a mouse a cookie question. We feel your pain here. Mom asks, I have an 11-year-old daughter and I want to be hands off and let her make her own decisions, especially with homework, but I'm worried that she might forget to finish and then it gets late and then bedtime gets late and I worry about the next day. How do I strike a balance between enabling autonomy and ensuring good sleep, both of which are important?
So the second chapter in our book, The Self-Driven Child, has the title of I Love You Too Much to Fight With You About Your Homework. And simply idea that going back to what Bill said, you want to offer your daughter help. Hey, I see you got that homework. Is there anything you need? Anything I can be helpful with there? And let me tell you this story. So I have a family I worked with. Dad is a super sophisticated consultant. Older daughter, super academic, could run the world. Younger son, anxious, ADHD, depressed. I get an email from Dad saying, I've decided to remove all support to my child. Do you have time to talk? Boy, that's a conversation I want to have. So we get on Zoom. I said, out of curiosity, what kind of support have you been giving him? Well, I remind him to do his homework. Okay. How's that working out? Not very well. How often do you remind him? Not very much. It's my wife who's on him all the time. Okay. So for you, what, 3, 4 times a night? About that, which probably means 4, 5, 6. And your wife twice that? About that, which means more. So I'm thinking this kid's home from 3 or 4 hours before parents are asleep. He's avoiding his homework and watching YouTube and then doing homework between 1 and 4 o'clock in the morning because he's waiting for these characters to get off his back. And I said, may I make a suggestion? He said, sure. I said, when he comes home, I ask him if he has a plan. He said, I do. I make him show. Ask him if he has a plan. If he says yes, trust him. If he says no, say, would you like me to help you make a plan? And you can apply this to 11-year-old. And if she wants your help, help her. If she says, no, I got it, trust him. So anything else, anything on that plan, second point, anything on that plan that I can be helpful with. If he says yes, follow through in the ways that he wants. If he says, no, I got it, trust him. He said, that's it. I said, you can't go from 10 times a night to 1. Then the third step is it okay if I check back in an hour and a half or 2, not to see if you got your homework done, but to see whether there's anything that I can be helpful with? He said, that's it. I said, try it. I get an email. I swear to you on my life, I get an email from him that night at 10:15. It might have been what you suggested, or maybe it was just a better day, but I just had the best conversation with my son about high school, about his schoolwork, possibly ever. And this boy he jumped like 50 percentile points on a standardized test that we were doing, in part because I'm pretty good at what I do, but partly because it wasn't so stressful at home. And his parents moved from being on him all the time to being behind him all the time. And he got into the same fancy pants school that his sister got in. And his dad's like, I never thought that this was possible. And I'm like, he always did. He always did. And if we can remind ourselves that children have brains in their head, they want their lives to work out. There is, by the way, a story in their first book where my son had more or less where a teacher reached out and said, I noticed he's showing up with his homework undone. Can you help? And was basically trying to get us to be on our kid to get the homework done. You got to read the book because I don't want to tell the whole story and it's too much fun. But as Bill said, it's your obligation as a parent to offer help and offer support and be there and help her in the ways that she needs. But to please, 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 please let your daughter know that it's her responsibility to get her work done. And if she blows it and she misses it, she's 11. What could be more important? What homework could possibly be more important than for her getting 2 things, an accurate model of reality that she's going to get out of school what she puts into it, and that you trust her not only to do well in school, but to make mistakes in school and learn from those mistakes.
And I'll just add to work on the bedtime separately. Be the consultant. I'm willing to help like that. Set your own consulting hours. I can help you if you're available from 7 to 8:30, but not past that. I need my rest. And then if you stay up too late, kind of work that out separately. Have a little meeting with her about working out a bedtime that works for her and works for you, because you don't want to feel like the worst parent in the world because you know how bad sleep deprivation is for kids.
Really good point.
Well, and it really works. When my daughter was in the 5th grade, she came downstairs and she said to me, "Never talk to me about my homework again." And I said, "Okay." And I didn't. And she went to that university in Palo Alto that lots of people want to go to. So it does work. Does work. Gentlemen,
But yeah,
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
no, no,
Go
go.
ahead.
No,
Good for you both.
no, I was just going to say I have two, but both I never asked my kids about homework. I walked this walk with my kids because I thought this way when I was with my kids. They both got PhDs without any pressure at all from me or my wife.
Well, there you go. So, gentlemen, it has been an incredible session. You can tell from the chat and all the emojis that people have really appreciated what you have to say. So I just want to end by giving you each about a minute to tell us what message you really want people to come home with tonight. And Bill, I'm going to start with you.
The first thing for me, I mean, I think Ned's in my mission is to help people understand that it's safe and it's right not to be on their kids all the time, not to worry about them all the time, to trust them and to trust them to they can figure their life out with support, with our experience when they're open to it, and we express confidence. The best message you can give a teenager, in my opinion, besides I love you no matter what, is I have complete confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life and learn from your mistakes. And I want you to have a ton of practice doing that before you leave home. But it's that expressing confidence. I want you to figure out your life. I don't always know what's right for you. And the thing is, when we trust kids, because they want their life to work, that they virtually never intentionally run their life into the ground. Sometimes they make a misstep and then they have to kind of correct. But that's what we want. That's what we want. We want them to have that confidence that I can make these decisions. If I screw something up, I can fix it, as opposed to trying to make it sure they never misstep, or that they always do what we think is right. Because the older I got with my own kids, I didn't know what's best for them because I didn't know who they wanted to be. And I figured my job is to help them figure out, who do you want to be? What's important to you? What do you really love to do? What are you good at? And to support them in being who they wanted to be.
Thank you, Bill. That is beautiful. You give me chills. I say that to my kids all the time. I trust that you can figure it out. And Ned, back to you. Look at
Oh,
these
thank
floating
you.
emojis are making me so happy.
Yeah, they're pretty. These are super fun. I like it. Um, I would echo the safety. One thought that's been running around my head a lot the last few months is that as parents, you love your kids just as much as I love my kids, and you want the sun and the moon for them. And when things aren't going well, or you think that they're taking some risky things, we go into overdrive trying to keep them safe.
Mhm.
And the hard part about doing things to keep kids safe is you can't do things to keep them safe without in the same way, at the same time, in some way subtle or a lot, convey to them that they should be afraid, right? When we harden schools to keep kids safe, we're also telling them that anything outside the confines of the schoolyard are really pretty scary. And the challenge is, you can make things structurally safe everywhere, but then you end up with brains that are scared all the time. And it's really hard to be happy. It's really hard to navigate life. It's hard to be creative. It's hard to be curious when you're afraid. And if I go back to the point about connection, people often think if I have enough wealth, this will protect my kid, right? If I live in a safe enough neighborhood, it'll protect my kid. But it turns out that a close connection that a kid has to a parent is an even more powerful thing. You can be in a really crummy neighborhood, and if the connection the kid has with a parent is safe, it just changes everything. And I'll end with a story. I was given a talk at a really good local public school just outside of DC here about her book, What Do You Say? And this mom came up to me afterwards. She was African American. It matters for the purpose of this. And she said, I picked up the self-driven child during the summer of 2020. And so you remember COVID was starting, and everybody was afraid. Everybody was afraid. It was also the summer of George Floyd. And she said, it felt to me, I was so afraid. I was afraid of everything. And it felt like the world was trying to hunt people who look like my 14-year-old boy. Can't tell the story. And she said, I read this book and I was determined. I read that chapter about being a non-anxious presence, that I was going to make home feel safe for my boy. And she said, it completely changed my relationship with my kid. And so some of you who are on this call are here because you're worried sick about your kids. And I get it. I mean, I had a kid who had a brain tumor. My daughter's that was way more complicated. And I had 4 years of really hard stuff because they had 4 years of really hard stuff. And if I could show you the people that they are now at age 20 and 23, to help you not worry, to feel that it's safe for your kids to struggle for now, because that's just part of their path. And they can be, and they will turn out to be the remarkable people that you want them to be.
Ned, bless you. We've watched you go through those struggles, and we're so happy to hear your kids are doing well. And listen, thank you, Fremont Union High Schools Foundation, Rita Allen, for sponsoring this amazing event. Thank you, Ned Johnson, Dr. Bill Stixrud. As always, we've never had the hearts flow like this, you guys. So we know that this was a wonderful, heartfelt session for everybody. Take care, everybody. Take 2 seconds, please, and fill out that survey when it pops up. Bless you all, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you, Ned and Bill. Thank you, Rita.